Imagine that your consciousness is like a building with dozens of floors, yet you have lived your entire life on the ground level. You work, relate, plan, react, dream, all within a single perceptual layer. And no matter how hard you try to change external circumstances, something always seems to pull you back into the same patterns. The same conflicts, the same financial ceilings, the same existential doubts. Now let me ask you honestly, what if the problem was never your reality, but the floor from which you are observing it? Neuroscience shows that a large portion of our decisions are automatic. Research on brain processing indicates that the brain runs routines based on memory, emotional conditioning, and reinforced neural pathways built over time. This is verifiable science. What we call personality is, to a significant extent, a network of neural circuits strengthened through repetition. And here is where we move beyond the laboratory into the realm of consciousness. If those circuits were built, they can be rebuilt. Quantum physics, when interpreted responsibly, does not claim that you magically create reality with your mind. What it demonstrates, for example, in what is known as the observer effect, is that measurement influences the behavior of subatomic particles. Scientifically, this means interaction alters the observed system. Spiritually, many interpret this as a powerful metaphor. The way you observe influences the way you experience. Notice the distinction. One is scientific data. The other is symbolic application. Here, we respect both, without confusing imagination with evidence. Activating your next level of consciousness is not about becoming overly mystical or excessively rational. It is about integration. It is understanding that your biology, your mind, and your perception form a dynamic system capable of operating at higher levels of coherence, clarity, and intention. If you sense there is something beyond automatic repetition, if you feel ready to leave the ground floor of your own awareness, subscribe to this channel. Not for algorithmic vanity, but because when you strengthen spaces that responsibly unite science and spirituality, you help expand a more lucid collective field. And that collective expansion impacts every individual who participates in it. Today, we are not speaking about superficial motivation. We are speaking about internal structure, about the architecture of consciousness. Because the next level is not a place you reach in the future. It is a reorganization of your internal state in the present. And the real question is, are you willing to leave behind the version of yourself that no longer sustains your growth? Take a deep breath. What you are about to understand may alter not only your choices, but the identity from which you choose. There is a silent phenomenon that governs most human lives: adaptation to the familiar. The human brain is designed, above all, to ensure survival, not expansion. This is not philosophical. It is neurobiological. Structures such as the amygdala constantly scan for threats and interpret change as potential risk. Whenever you attempt to step outside a familiar pattern, starting a new project, moving to a new city, changing an emotional habit, your nervous system reacts as if facing danger. This explains why so many people feel anxiety right before growth. Discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of upgrading. Think of consciousness as an operating system. Every repeated belief strengthens synaptic connections. Every recurring emotion releases specific chemical combinations. Over time, your body becomes dependent on those chemical states. There is, quite literally, a biochemical addiction to certain emotions, including negative ones. When someone says, "I always attract the same kind of relationship," it is often not fate. It is neuro-emotional coherence. Let us remain responsible here. There is no scientific evidence that isolated thoughts directly alter external events. However, there is extensive evidence that thoughts and emotions shape perception, behavior, and decision-making. and repeated behavior changes outcomes. Change begins internally because that is where the pattern is generated. But there is something even deeper. In cognitive psychology, we speak of confirmation bias, the tendency to seek evidence that confirms what we already believe. This means that if you believe you are incapable, your brain will filter reality to prove you right. Now imagine the impact of this over 10 or 20 years. You are not simply living a life. You are reinforcing a narrative. And every narrative creates invisible ceilings. Activating your next level of consciousness requires that you perceive these limits. Not to fight them with force, but to observe them with clarity. Conscious observation reduces automatic reactivity. Studies on mindfulness show that regular attention practices reduce overactivity in the amygdala and strengthen the prefrontal cortex, responsible for more conscious decisions. This is measurable. Spiritually, we may interpret this process as raising your frequency. Scientifically, it is increasing neural self-regulation. Both languages describe the same movement from different perspectives. Let me propose a simple exercise. Over the next few days, observe which thoughts automatically arise when facing challenges. Do not immediately try to change them. Simply notice and mentally record them. This practice alone begins dissolving autopilot. Consciousness is the space between stimulus and response. And the greater that space, the greater your freedom. If this reflection is already expanding your perception, leave a comment with the phrase, "I observe before I react." By writing it, you are not merely engaging with the video. You are reinforcing a new mental posture. And when you support this kind of content with your participation, you help expand a more conscious collective field. The next level does not require force. It requires perception. And perception can be trained. There is a truth rarely spoken directly. You are not living your deepest desires because you are still committed to your current identity. This may sound uncomfortable, but it is liberating. In modern psychology, identity is not merely how you describe yourself. It is a set of neural, emotional, and behavioral patterns repeated consistently enough to create predictability. The brain loves predictability. It conserves energy. The more you repeat a reaction, the more automatic it becomes. That is why someone can say they desire prosperity while continuing to make decisions aligned with scarcity, or claim they want peace while feeding recurring internal conflicts. This is not moral inconsistency. It is identity coherence. From the perspective of neuroplasticity, a scientifically validated concept, the brain can reorganize its connections throughout life. New experiences, repeated thoughts, and repeated emotional states create new neural networks. This is measurable through brain imaging. It is not metaphor. Now comes the spiritual dimension of this same reality. What you call self is not fixed. It is a dynamic field of patterns. If identity is pattern, then expanded consciousness is pattern upgrade. Here is the crucial point. You do not manifest what you want. You manifest what your identity is coherent with. If internally you still perceive yourself as limited, insecure, or unworthy, any opportunity that enters your life will be filtered through that internal code. Often, you will unconsciously sabotage what you claim to desire. This does not happen because the universe conspires against you. It happens because your nervous system seeks coherence with what it recognizes as safe. Activating your next level of consciousness requires that you begin acting as the version you wish to become, before feeling completely secure. And here is an important scientific note. The brain does not perfectly distinguish vivid imagination from real experience when genuine emotional involvement is present. Studies on visualization show that mental rehearsal activates brain regions similar to those used in physical practice. This explains why athletes use strategic visualization. It also explains why we rehearse fears so effectively. You are already using this mechanism. The question is, are you using it for or against yourself? I propose a structured practice. Daily, for 5 minutes, visualize yourself making decisions as your expanded self. Do not merely imagine outcomes. Imagine posture, tone of voice, emotional clarity. Feel this version in your body. This is not escapist fantasy. It is neurological rehearsal. And whenever the old impulse arises, the automatic reaction, the habitual doubt, pause and ask, does this belong to my old identity or my expanding identity? Repeated honestly, this question begins dissolving the cycle. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, I choose to act as my expanded self. By doing so, you begin consolidating that decision internally. And by supporting this space with your presence, you help more people access this integration of science and consciousness. Subscribing and engaging here is not merely supporting a channel, it is sustaining a community that seeks lucidity. Identity is not a prison, it is a project, and you can redesign it. So far, we have spoken about perception and identity. Now we must enter an even more decisive territory, emotional coherence. You may intellectually understand everything discussed so far. You may agree, even find it insightful. But if your emotional state remains misaligned, transformation will not sustain itself. Neuroscience has demonstrated that emotions are not abstractions. They are measurable electrochemical states. Each emotion corresponds to specific combinations of neurotransmitters and hormones circulating through the body. Fear involves adrenaline and cortisol. Gratitude and connection are associated with oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin. This means your body does not react only to external events. It reacts primarily to your interpretation of those events. When an emotion is frequently repeated, the body becomes accustomed to it. Over time, you do not merely feel the emotion, you become chemically conditioned to it. That is why some people claim they want peace but unconsciously generate conflict. Their nervous system is habituated to tension. Here is an important clarification. When modern spirituality speaks of emotional frequency, it uses metaphorical language to describe internal states of physiological coherence or incoherence. It does not mean emotions are mystical waves measured by esoteric devices. It means emotions organize your nervous system, and organized systems make different decisions than disorganized ones. Research on heart coherence shows that when thoughts and emotions align, heart rhythm becomes more harmonious. This coherence influences the brain, improves cognitive clarity, and reduces impulsivity. This is applied science. Spiritually, this may be understood as alignment between mind and heart. Now reflect. How many important decisions have you made in states of anxiety? How many opportunities have you rejected because fear disguised itself as caution? Activating your next level of consciousness requires that you regulate your internal state before acting externally. This does not mean denying difficult emotions. It means observing them, understanding their origin, and choosing not to react automatically from them. A simple yet profound practice. Before any relevant decision, pause for 2 minutes. Breathe slowly, extending your exhalation. Prolonged exhalation activates the parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for calm and regulation. This small physiological adjustment already changes the quality of your choice. What spirituality calls raising your vibration can often be understood as learning to exit chronic emotional reactivity. And here is an essential distinction: forced positivity is not coherence. Repeating optimistic phrases while the body remains tense creates internal conflict. Coherence is when thought and emotion move together. The next level of consciousness is not a permanent euphoric state. It is lucid stability. It is the ability to remain centered even amid uncertainty. When you master your internal state, the external world loses its power to destabilize you. And at that point, more aligned decisions begin to emerge naturally. Expansion does not happen because you force the universe. It happens because you consistently reorganize your internal system. There is a specific phase in the expansion of consciousness that almost no one describes honestly: the period of disorientation. Many people begin a path of self-awareness expecting immediate peace, constant clarity, and continuous elevation. But what often happens is the opposite. Old interests lose meaning. Certain relationships begin to feel misaligned. Environments that once felt comfortable start generating subtle discomfort. This is not regression. It is reconfiguration. When you begin observing your patterns, as we discussed earlier, you interrupt automatic identification with them. And when the old identity starts losing strength, a gap emerges, a space between who you were and who you are becoming. That space can create insecurity. From a psychological perspective, this is understandable. The brain prefers a stable identity, even if limited, over an undefined state. Uncertainty activates alert mechanisms. That is why many people abandon growth processes precisely when they are about to cross a significant threshold. Spiritually, this phase is sometimes called a dark night or transitional period. But we must approach this concept maturely. It is not a mandatory mystical event, nor glorified suffering. It is a natural phenomenon when internal structures are reorganized. Imagine renovating a house while still living inside it. During renovation, there is dust, noise, temporary discomfort. If you interpret that chaos as failure, you will stop the project. If you understand it as part of the process, you will continue. Expansion of consciousness follows a similar logic. You may begin questioning old religious, political, or familial beliefs. You may feel you no longer fit certain groups. You may even experience a deeper internal silence, as if old critical voices are losing intensity. These are signs that autopilot is weakening. Neurobiologically, new circuits are being strengthened while old, less used synaptic pathways begin losing efficiency. This process is called synaptic pruning. The brain literally eliminates connections that are no longer reinforced. This is science. Spiritually, we may say old versions are dissolving. But here is the crucial point: expansion does not mean superiority. It does not mean distancing yourself from others with arrogance, or adopting an isolated posture of enlightenment. Expanded consciousness is amplified humility. It is understanding that you are in constant evolution, just like everyone around you. Another important sign is increased personal responsibility. Instead of blaming circumstances or others, you begin recognizing your active participation in your experiences. This is not guilt. It is autonomy. And autonomy can be uncomfortable, because it removes excuses. If you are moving through this transitional period, understand, temporary confusion does not invalidate progress. Often, it is evidence of it. Continue observing. Continue regulating your internal state. Continue rehearsing the identity you intend to consolidate. Discomfort is temporary. Expansion is cumulative. And every time you choose awareness instead of automatic reaction, you strengthen the new structure being built within you. Consciousness without discipline becomes merely a passing insight. Many people experience moments of clarity. During a book, a meditation, or a deep conversation, they feel temporary expansion. But days later, they are reacting exactly as before. Not because they failed, but because they did not consolidate the experience into practice. The brain changes through consistent repetition, not isolated epiphanies. There is an important difference between awakening and stabilizing awakening. The first is a glimpse. The second is construction. Neuroscientifically, each time you choose to observe before reacting, you strengthen connections in the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with self-regulation, planning, and conscious decision-making. At the same time, you reduce the automatic dominance of more reactive regions. But this requires training. Spiritually, this discipline is called presence. Psychologically, it is self-regulation. Biologically, it is neuroreorganization. 3 different languages describing the same phenomenon. The question is not whether you will have automatic thoughts. You will. The question is how long you remain identified with them. A simple yet profoundly transformative practice is structured mental vigilance. Choose 3 moments in your day, for example, upon waking, mid-afternoon, and before sleeping. At each moment, pause for a few minutes and observe. What type of thought dominated today? Which emotion was most recurrent? Did my decisions reflect my old identity or my expanding identity? This reflection should not be done with judgment, only with honesty. The discipline of consciousness also involves deliberate exposure to content, environments, and conversations that sustain your process. The brain is highly influenced by environmental repetition. If you spend hours consuming stimuli that reinforce fear, scarcity, and comparison, your nervous system will be conditioned accordingly. You are not only what you think, you are what you mentally consume. Another essential point: the body must be included in this process. Mental states are deeply influenced by sleep, nutrition, and physical movement. Sleep deprivation significantly reduces the brain's ability to regulate emotions. This is scientifically established. There is no consistent expansion of consciousness in a chronically exhausted body. Caring for the body is not vanity. It is evolutionary strategy. Activating your next level requires total integration, mind, emotion, and biology aligned. And here is a deeper understanding: discipline is not rigidity. It is commitment to your own expansion. It is not about perfection, but continuity. There will be days when you notice yourself reacting as before. That does not mean absolute regression. It simply means old circuits are still being weakened. Persistence is the decisive factor. Consciousness is not a fixed state you achieve and maintain forever. It is a living practice. And every daily choice, small, seemingly ordinary, is a silent vote in favor of the version you are becoming. There is a more mature way to understand the idea of parallel realities, without falling into fantasy or scientific distortion. In theoretical physics, there are interpretations, such as the many worlds interpretation, that suggest the mathematical possibility of multiple quantum outcomes. It is important to clarify, this is a hypothesis within physics, not an empirically proven mechanism accessible in daily human life. There is no scientific evidence that you can literally jump between universes. However, there is a powerful symbolic application of this idea. With every decision you make, multiple possibilities cease to exist as lived experience and remain only as unrealized potential. Your current life is the accumulated result of the choices you have consistently repeated. You do not need to imagine physical parallel universes to understand this. You only need to observe your own biography. If you had said yes to certain opportunities, if you had developed certain skills consistently, if you had maintained different relationships, your present reality would be different. This is not mysticism. It is causal logic. What we call a timeline can be practically understood as the trajectory built by the sum of daily micro-decisions. Here lies the essential point. Most people make decisions from their old identity, reactive emotional state, and unconscious conditioning. Therefore, they continue reinforcing the same trajectory. Activating your next level of consciousness means transforming each choice into a deliberate act. Before an important decision, ask yourself, which version of me is choosing right now? The version seeking immediate safety, or the version sustaining long-term expansion? This simple question profoundly alters the course of action. When you act from greater awareness, you are not changing universes. You are altering the statistical probability of your future outcomes. You are influencing the environments you will enter, the people you will connect with, and the opportunities you will perceive. Remember, perception determines focus. Focus determines action. Action determines results. This sequence is verifiable. Spiritually, we may say you are tuning into a new frequency of reality. Psychologically, you are altering cognitive filters. Behaviorally, you are modifying response patterns. Different layers of the same dynamic. There is also a subtler aspect. When you choose consciously, even if results are not immediate, you internally strengthen your expanded identity. And this creates a cumulative effect. Life does not change only when major events occur. It changes when small patterns stop being repeated. You may not control all external circumstances, but you can choose from which internal level you respond to them. And that choice, repeated over time, builds an entirely different trajectory. Expansion of consciousness is not an escape from reality. It is conscious participation in its construction. There comes a moment when understanding is no longer enough. You may comprehend neural mechanisms, recognize your patterns, regulate your emotions, and make more conscious choices. Yet if you continue behaving as your old version in daily situations, the system reverts to its previous pattern. True activation happens through embodiment. Embodiment means aligning thought, emotion, and behavior in a coherent and repeated way. Ask yourself, how does my expanded self enter a room? How does that version conduct a difficult conversation? How does it respond to criticism? How does it manage time? Notice we are not speaking about artificial grandiosity. We are speaking about subtle micro-adjustments, steadier posture, slower breathing, deeper listening, less defensive responses. The body is an essential part of consciousness. Your physiology directly influences perception. Studies in behavioral psychology show that changes in posture and breathing alter emotional states. The direction is bidirectional. What you feel changes your body, and what you do with your body changes how you feel. This means you can begin with behavior to consolidate identity. Many people wait to feel ready before acting. But emotional readiness often emerges after consistent action, not before it. Embodiment requires calm courage. It is not about forcing an artificial personality. It is about acting in alignment with the clarity you have already developed internally. There is also a rarely discussed principle. The environment responds to predictability. When you become more coherent, emotionally stable, verbally clear, behaviorally consistent, people begin to perceive you differently. The relational field reorganizes. Not because you emitted magic, but because you altered your presence. Presence is perception applied. At this stage of the process, it becomes essential to understand something deeper. The affirmations you record here, in the comments or in your personal journal, are more than words. They are vibrational codes. When you consciously write, read, and repeat them, you create an energetic circuit that reprograms the mind and anchors this new timeline into your field. When I invite you to comment, it is not merely for video engagement, it is to nourish the collective flow of consciousness. It is an anchoring exercise. Daily repetition transforms vibration into identity. If you wish to seal this understanding now, right here or for yourself, I consciously choose the frequency that creates my world. Repeat this phrase in the coming days, aloud or silently. Allow it to become the soundtrack of your vibrational field. Each time you pronounce it, the universe reorganizes its particles around this new coherence. Gradually, everything that does not resonate with it begins to dissolve, naturally, without effort. Let me contextualize this responsibly. When we say, the universe reorganizes particles, we use symbolic language to describe a real phenomenon. By consciously repeating an affirmation aligned with coherent action, you alter your focus, perception, and behavior. This changes your decisions. And different decisions produce different results. Spiritual symbolism points to the subjective dimension of transformation. Science explains the behavioral mechanism. Both converge on the same principle: coherent repetition creates identity. Embodying your next level of consciousness means acting, speaking, and deciding as someone who has already transcended the old pattern, even while the process is still consolidating. Do not wait for the world to confirm your change before you change. Change, and allow the world to gradually adjust to your new coherence. There is a silent difference between wanting to evolve and taking responsibility for your own expansion. By now, you understand that patterns are neurologically built, that identity is adaptable, that emotions organize your internal system, that decisions alter trajectories, and that embodiment consolidates transformation. Now we must unite these pieces into a broader understanding. Expanded consciousness is not an isolated state you achieve and display as a spiritual trophy. It is a dynamic pattern of continuous alignment. Think of consciousness as an internal field of organization. When your thoughts are contradictory, your emotions dysregulated, and your actions inconsistent, that field becomes fragmented. Fragmentation generates noise. Noise generates indecision. Indecision sustains stagnation. On the other hand, when thought, emotion, and behavior converge, you create coherence. Coherence generates clarity. Clarity generates directed action. Directed action generates cumulative results. This is not exaggerated spiritualization. It is applied psychological structure. Many people believe that expanding consciousness means accessing extraordinary experiences, visions, altered states, unusual phenomena. But true expansion is quieter and more powerful. It is the ability to remain lucid when provoked. It is the ability to choose maturity when the ego demands reaction. It is the ability to sustain long-term vision when fear demands immediate gratification. That is the next level. You do not need to abandon your life to access it. You need to reorganize the way you live it. Notice something important. Most people live reactively to their environment, news, social media, opinions, economic pressures. Each external stimulus generates an automatic internal response. Expanded consciousness reverses that order. You begin responding to the environment from a stabilized internal center, rather than reacting from external triggers. That shift changes everything. When you stop being merely a passive receiver of influence and become a conscious agent of choice, your relationship with time also changes. You begin thinking in terms of construction rather than constant urgency. This affects practical areas of life: finances, health, relationships, purpose. Conscious expansion is not separate from daily life. It is applied within daily life. Another fundamental point: this process is not linear. There will be apparent advances and regressions. The brain still carries old emotional memories. Certain triggers may activate past responses. This does not mean you have lost everything you built. It means consolidation is still occurring. True spiritual maturity does not eliminate challenges. It alters how you move through them. Over time, you will notice something subtle. What once seemed overwhelming begins to feel manageable. What once destabilized you becomes information. You gain internal space. And internal space is freedom. From that space, decisions become less impulsive and more strategic. Relationships become less dependent and more conscious. Goals become less fantasized and more structured. You stop seeking constant intensity and begin seeking sustainable coherence. And that completely transforms your experience of reality. There comes a point in the journey when you realize something decisive. The next level of consciousness is not an event. It is a repeated choice. It is not a mystical portal that opens only for a select few. It is not a privilege reserved for monks, brilliant scientists, or special individuals. It is a progressive reorganization of how you think, feel, and act. You began by understanding that the brain automates patterns. You recognize that identity is built through repetition. You saw that emotions organize your nervous system and influence decisions. You realize that choices shape trajectories and that embodiment consolidates transformation. Now integrate all of this into a practical vision. Activating your next level of consciousness means observing your patterns without identifying with them, reconfiguring your identity through coherent repetition, regulating your emotional state before making decisions, choosing deliberately from your expanded self, embodying that version in everyday behavior. There is no hidden mystery here. There is consistency. And here is something essential. The process does not require perfection. It requires continuity. You do not need to eliminate all negative thoughts. You need to reduce the time you remain dominated by them. You do not need to never feel fear. You need to learn to decide despite it. Expanded consciousness is, above all, applied maturity. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. You will begin to notice subtle changes. Your response to conflict will become less impulsive. Your long-term vision will become clearer. Financial decisions will become more strategic. Relationships will be less driven by need and more by conscious choice. This is not mysticism. It is internal reorganization generating external consequence. And then you will understand something even deeper. The highest timeline is not a distant destination. It is a state of coherence available now. Every time you choose lucidity over automatic reaction, you access that state. Every time you act with intention instead of habit, you strengthen it. If this message resonated with you, share it. Help expand this field of consciousness, because each awakened person illuminates hundreds of others. Leave your comment, your vibration, your testimony, not merely for engagement, but because your energy is part of this collective construction. And remember, the highest timeline is not a place in the future. It is a state of being, available here and now. May you walk in peace, in clarity, and in love. Until the next awakening.